Okay, we'd like to get started. Good morning. My name is Mary Bucher. I am Chief of the Systems Management Resources and Technology Division in WTB. I'd like to welcome you here to our Spectrum Dashboard public forum. And I will provide you with a brief overview of the dashboard. I'd like to tell you what we've done, what we've heard, and our thoughts on what we might do in the future to enhance the system. As you will see, we do have some ideas about how we can make the dashboard better, but we really need your input to make it the best possible tool to access information on how Spectrum is licensed. After the introduction, I will turn things over to James Brown, who will moderate the panel, which will be followed by a question and answer session. I'd like to thank you all for being here, and I look forward to hearing your input throughout this forum. The Spectrum Dashboard, as many of you know, provides enhanced access to information about how spectrum bands are used and allocated. Our goal in putting this together was to provide one-stop shopping to this information, which is not available at this time. And we also focused on using plain language to hopefully make the information more easily understood by the public. As you may already know, it contains a lot of new features that are not currently available in our licensing database. It contains comprehensive information on how spectrum is used and the ability to search for that information based on selected bands of choice. This is a point where we really try to focus on plain language because the information we have out there now uses a lot of technical language that may not be understood by most people. It rolls commercial licenses up by common names so you can identify spectrum held by commonly used names of major carriers. Right now on our licensing databases, most of that information is under different subsidiary names, and there's no way you can do a search on AT&T or Verizon or T-Mobile to see what licenses they hold. It generates maps that show the amount of spectrum that's held across the country at the county level. It aggregates that information and makes it available on a map. And we also have query downloads, which provide access to the data in a format that can be easily imported into many spreadsheet and other programs. Here is a chart that shows you the type of searches that we've been seeing on the dashboard. There's been more than 85,000 searches performed, and these are external searches. These do not include searches performed within the FCC. By far, the most popular searches are the browse spectrum band search and the browse using a map search. They make up more than 80% of the searches we've seen so far, but we're still looking at ways that we can make these searches more useful and enhance them, so let us know if you have any ideas. The least used search is the FCC license category search, and we are looking at changes to that search to make it more useful. Please let us know if you have any suggestion for that search or any other search throughout this forum. Additional capabilities that you may not be aware of based on the types of searches we've seen used. You can generate maps showing the amount of spectrum held by major carriers. If you go into the common name search and you do a name search based on a major carrier, you can click on the map tab and that will show you the spectrum it holds across the country at the county level. Our license results now show you the counties that are covered by that license. It shows you either fully or partially covered counties, and it does that for partitioned licenses as well. So if a person has an undefined area, right now all you can really see on ULS is the coordinates and that there's an undefined area, and you would have to map it to know where it is. In the dashboard, you actually see the counties that are covered by that, and you can do searches that way, and it will bring back counties covered by undefined areas. There are also canned reports with all of the data that the dashboard contains. So we have the ability to download a query, but we also have the entire data available, all the data for the dashboard available in canned reports, and that can be accessed from the Spectrum Dashboard webpage. The initial beta version that was released in May was a first step for us on this project. The broadband plan recommended that we continue to improve and augment the dashboard functionality and the data that's included in the dashboard. The intent of these continued improvements is to assist us in spectrum policy, promote secondary markets to improve communications, and improve services across the country with a particular focus on rural, underserved, and tribal areas. As a result, we are collecting feedback on how we can improve the dashboard. And we plan to launch the Spectrum Dashboard version 2.0 later this year. Today's forum is an important step in collecting that feedback. Since the release of the beta version, we have been collecting feedback through an online survey that's available from the dashboard, discussion boards, trade shows, comments to our blog, and our e-support system. We talked to almost 100 people at CTIA soon after the dashboard released, and we were also at NAB and talked to people there as well. Some of the suggestions that we have received on the dashboard so far from the public is that the dashboard should include information on leases, which currently is not there. It should provide a more complete picture of geography and population information for licenses and what they cover. Right now, we basically can tell you that it fully or partially covers a county. We don't give you a percentage or anything like that. You can map it and see it, but it does not give you a percentage. And it doesn't tell you for partially covered counties what the population is. We've heard that it should provide more information on broadcast licenses, and right now we're currently using information from the DTV transition. And then we've also heard right now when you generate a map, it'll show you county and state boundaries. And we've heard that it should also include overlays of market boundaries and other third-party data such as census data. There are several other enhancements that we are considering. These enhancements include modifying how cellular licenses are depicted in the dashboard, and I will explain that a little more in a moment. We are also considering expanding the range of spectrum included in the dashboard. If we can, come up with a range that would make sense. We're looking at adding search capabilities and options. One example would be a specialized search tailored towards identifying spectrum federally recognized tribal lands. And finally, we are considering providing access to the shapefiles within the dashboard. I'd like to provide you some more detailed information about what we're considering for some of these enhancements. For spectrum leasing, our thought is that we would include leases in the dashboard, and beyond that, we would show on the licenses that are on the dashboard what spectrum is being leased. So right now, within ULS, you basically see the license and you link to leases to try to identify how spectrum is being leased. But we're considering within the dashboard on the license itself showing you or identifying the spectrum that's being leased and the type of lease. We're also looking at including leases and information on spectrum being leased in our data downloads and our maps as well. And we would want to provide the functionality to allow the user to choose whether they want to include leased spectrum or not in the downloads and maps. We're also looking at modifying how cellular licenses are depicted in the dashboard. Cellular license or exclusive license areas on cellular licenses are called CGSAs. We do not have the CGSA boundaries for cellular licenses in electronic format, so we cannot put them in the dashboard. What we have done and what we have used is that we've used cellular service area boundaries. We have enough information to develop those boundaries and include them in the dashboard. But in some cases, these cellular service area boundaries extend beyond the CGSAs, but in the dashboard we would show them. As a result, the beta version of the dashboard somewhat overcounts cellular spectrum. For version 2.0, we are considering displaying cellular licenses based on the portion of the cellular service area boundary which we use now that lies within the original market boundary, or CMA. And here's a picture that shows you what that would look like. For this particular case, the blue circles would be basically the outline of the service area boundary, or the SAB, that they extend beyond the green box, which is your cellular market area. So right now, it's possible that those blue circles, or that portion of the SAB that extends beyond the market area, would be part of their license, and it's possible it's not, and we cannot tell. So in the version 2.0, we're looking at adjusting the depiction to cut them off and then limit it to the cellular market area. We are also looking at modifying the broadcast information we include in the dashboard. As I said before, we used information that was based on the DTV transition because we had developed geographies for that information. So right now, the dashboard only contains full-service broadcast stations, broadcast television stations, and it's based on information that was current as of the June 2009 transition. So we are planning to modify that so that we develop new geographic areas based on current licensing data, and we would add low-power television stations to the dashboard. We're also looking at ways that we can identify spectrum on tribal lands. Some of our thoughts would include that we would enhance our browse using a map search to add tribal lands as a geographic search criteria. This would allow users to go in, pick a tribal land, and the system would identify any license that covers that tribal land. Another thought is that we would provide a tribal land overlay for maps generated within the dashboard. So you could generate a map and then you could overlay it with a tribal land. Okay, now I'd like to turn it over to James Brown, who is an analyst within our mobility division, to introduce our panelists and moderate this session.
Thanks, Mary. Before we get started, I just wanted to go over a couple things. We've asked the panelists to speak for approximately 5 minutes, and to help you out, we have this big shot clock in front of you. And so it's going to count down 5 minutes, and then at 1 minute, it's going to flash yellow. And then once you get to 5 minutes, it's going to be red. And then at that point, once you've exceeded your time, it's going to start counting down negatively, so you'll know how far you've exceeded what you're supposed to say. So just try to keep it within the 5 minute time frame, and we'll allow some leniency. After the presentations, we're going to have a question and answer session, so we'll pass around mics if you do have a question, and we're also monitoring things online, and people looking at it online can also send in their questions, and we'll answer those as well. So just to help answer the questions, I just wanted to identify 3 people. We have John Gabrish from the Media Bureau. If you could just put up your hand, John. Ira Keltz from the Office of Engineering and Technology, and then Roger Noel from the Wireless Bureau. Based on the amount of time, if people are exceeding their time, we might take a break halfway through. If not, we'll probably just get through all the panelists and then have the question and answer session. So just to turn it over to the first panelist is Brian Higgins from the law firm of Wilkinson, Barker, and Nauer. Thanks, Brian.
Thanks, Roger. Thanks, Mary. And thank you for holding this panel today. The FCC and the Wireless Bureau has a strong tradition of holding these public seminars to discuss new databases such as this. And in the past, and it appears to be in this case as well, public input is reflected in redesign and eventually in improvements to these resources, which benefits everyone. So I appreciate the chance to speak here today. My general reaction to the dashboard, I'm very impressed. This is something that looks like you would purchase off of a commercial website or something you would access through the open market, not something you would expect on a government website necessarily. It seems to be very intuitive. It's well designed. It's got great functionality, and it looks nice too. Not that that's a major criteria, but it is a very attractive, highly functional interface. I kind of gather from looking at the materials and reading the public notices that a couple of objectives are intended to be served by the database. First, it's intended to be sort of a one-stop shopping place for people who know very little about FCC licensing or spectrum allocation. But it's also designed to provide new and useful tools to people who do a lot of work in this area, and I think it succeeds very well in both areas. And there's more that can be done. I realize that's a tough balance to strike because the more you gear it towards people who have lots of experience, the more you start adding the weeds to the process that confuse people who are new to this and coming into it with very little background information. With that said, I'm mostly a wireless guy, so I'm going to speak mostly, my comments are in the context of wireless licensing, cellular, PCS, things of that nature, and not so much in the broadcasting context. For those of you who've had a chance to play with the database, and they've got the main page up here on the screen right now, the first option is to browse by spectrum bands, and this is a great innovation where you can actually pull up an excerpt from the spectrum of table allocations and look at a particular band, see how it's allocated, see what services have been licensed in that band, and then that's a good starting point to do your research to figure out if there might be spectrum opportunities in that band for a particular purpose. One thing I think might be helpful here is a general discussion of the spectrum allocation and spectrum licensing process. Somebody who wasn't really aware of how those things relate to what spectrum is available could come to the conclusion that all spectrum is available for all purposes at all times. And I think there needs to be a discussion that says this is how the spectrum is divided up among services. This is where it's available for these purposes, and here is where there are licenses available for those purposes. I think that would be a great add-on. You wouldn't have to provide a lot of information, but sort of a short tutorial on the spectrum allocation process, I think, would provide a very helpful context to that particular search. Also, one of the things that is actually available on a different one of the search tabs, you can actually you hit one of the little carrots and it drops down and it tells you where the services are licensed and what the rule parts and what they're used for. On the ribbon that has the spectrum of table allocations, if you're doing a search, for example, and you see that there's cars licensed in that, the cable area relay service is licensed in that band. If you could click that hot link, and it would take you to that description of what the cars band and the car service is for, I think that would be very helpful at that part of the spectrum dashboard. I see I'm running out of time, so I'll speed it up here. On the map feature, this too is a great innovation, and I was surprised, frankly, to find this. This is a very sophisticated way to conduct searches. One thing I would like to see is the ability not only to search by individual counties, but if you could actually search by market areas. So if you wanted to know everybody who was who held, for example, broadband spectrum or CMRS spectrum in the Washington, D.C. CMA, you wouldn't have to first figure out which counties are in the CMA. You could pick that as an additional option. And then pull back all the license records that are in that CMA. The export feature on this page and also on the search by name, those are great innovations. You have no idea how much work has been done and how much this process has been greatly simplified to pull out all the data by county, by spectrum type, by use. All this in the past, when these projects have been done, has been done by hand, and now the FCC has done a lot of that legwork for you to be able to pull it into a spreadsheet or a database to access it. I'll end on just a couple of little notes. spectrum tags and frequency uses are used in a lot of the search pages. I was hesitant to really use those or rely on those because I'm not sure what services they were capturing. And I don't know if there's a description in the web page anywhere about what those tags are capturing, but that would be helpful. And finally, I think on that last tab, search by FCC license categories, for experienced users who have a broader idea of what they would like to search, I would like to see this expanded as sort of an advanced search tab, or maybe an advanced search tab added as a fifth tab. Basically giving you the ability to search by really any of the combination of indexed fields in the various databases. One thing you have on your current, on ULS when you go into the map feature is the ability to turn on and turn off different map layers, county lines, market lines. The mapping feature in here is 100% better, or 1,000% better. If you could still have that same functionality, the ability to turn on and turn off the different layers of data you would like to see, in particular, be able to see the market boundaries on a map, and even turn off all the other data. Sometimes all you want to see are the market boundaries and maybe the county lines. You don't really need to see the interstates or the other major features. And finally, I am very much in favor of allowing the public to be able to export the shapefiles. A lot of the licensing is done on county definitions that were used in 1990, and there have been changes by the federal government in how counties are treated for census purposes, which do not line up precisely, especially in Alaska, with the current definitions. In any event, thank you very much. I appreciate this opportunity, and I look forward to seeing what comes next.
Right. Thanks, Brian. Up next is Michelle Cohen from Thomas Hine.
Thank you. I'm here today on behalf of the Federal Communications Bar Association's Access to Government Committee, and I'm one of the co-chairs. I wanted to thank the Commission staff for continuing to include us in these processes. We're involved in the updated rollout of ECFS, and we very much appreciate participation in the Commission's processes and welcome the openness of those processes. I don't speak on behalf of the entire membership of the Federal Communications Bar Association, but rather on behalf of our committee. Generally speaking, anytime there's a process that does make it easier for our membership and the public at large to access the information, we welcome those opportunities. And I think the changes to the ECFS as well as the Spectrum dashboard are going to really augment the information available not just to us who practice here in the D.C. area, but one thing I try to be very conscious of are, even though we are inside the Beltway, are those people who are not inside the Beltway, the people who are outside the Beltway and may not have ready access to make it over quickly to the Commission for information or immediately access Commission staff if there's time differences, et cetera, and any kind of opportunity to access the information remotely in an easily available manner is something that we very much support on behalf of the committee. One thing that we've made clear, I think, on the ECFS side and here too is just a continuing need for training as this is rolled out, making the public and bar members aware of the rollout opportunities to comment. I know you indicated that you took many comments at CTIA and NAB, and I think any other opportunities for people who may not be present at those types of conferences would be welcome, and just updates on the rollout, updates on what's available, I think is always appreciated, particularly for those who are not on site at these conferences or inside the Beltway. I think I found Brian's comments very helpful as far as the information on the spectrum, and I think we do assume that people know how you get spectrum, and I think that we have to be careful about our assumptions because there's all sorts of different knowledge, and I know when I go into something that I'm familiar with, like ECFS or IBFS, it's a little bit different when I have to venture into another database that I may be less familiar with, and it takes a lot longer, and I may not access the information that I need. And I think, any information that we can give to people who may not have that information readily available is definitely welcome, and we need to just be a little bit careful about what we assume people know. A couple other items I wanted to point out, watching my time too, is a help feature. Because I know sometimes, even those of us who consider ourselves semi-expert do get stuck, and we don't know if it's our computer, if it's the commission's database, if it's a maintenance issue. And I think either having an immediate information pop up as to where you can go for help, if it's during business hours, or who you can contact after business hours. And I think it's great for those businesses that kind of have a live chat feature if you run into a problem. I don't know if that's something that could be done here, but at least something that there's a help box or a help tool that will direct you to the appropriate staff person, because a lot of us do know who to go to, but many out there in the greater community using the services may not. And I think just an update, there's a lot of information here, which is great. I would assume that there will be times when there needs to be maintenance and updating, and just making people aware when that updating is occurring and how up-to-date the information is. Those would be my key points today. I thank you for your time and your consideration.
Thank you, Michelle. Up next is Peter Tannenwald from Fletcher, Heald, and Hildreth.
Thank you for having me this morning. I'm a user of a lot of these tools, and I have a lot of clients who are users of these tools. And many of them are concerned about the problem of how you incorporate information into the database to make sure that it's both accurate and complete. I'm not sure whether the Spectrum dashboard is focused on particular kinds of users. I think it's supposed to be something for everyone. But that presents a little bit of a problem if you're trying to use one tool to meet the needs of somebody who wants to buy Spectrum or apply for a license in Spectrum or become a customer of a licensee or find out the scope of a licensee's holdings, maybe for research purposes or to demonstrate that they have too much or they don't have too much, so on and so forth. The area where I have a lot of people who are concerned is in secondary broadcast services. That's both television, low-power television and translators, and low-power FM. First, the fact that the Spectrum dashboard went up based on the DTV transition information and only full-power TV was a little scary to these people because of some of the purposes for which the Spectrum dashboard might be used. For example, television spectrum is sought by wireless microphone users on a secondary basis and soon white spaces users on a secondary basis. And if those people went to the Spectrum dashboard and did not find all the secondary broadcast users, they would make mistakes which might result in interference and complaints and so on. But that's a short-term problem that the Spectrum dashboard is going to cure sooner or later. Nevertheless, even when it does cure the problem, I think that it's going to be very difficult to establish a meaningful and useful database. For example, I know more about low-power TV than low-power FM, but I think the considerations are not that different. In low-power television, applicants are allowed to receive interference without limit, and many of them operate stations that receive a great deal of interference. Therefore, a service area prediction tool for those people will often overstate, to some extent, the area that they serve. On the other hand, many low-power TV stations are received to their 41 dBu digital contour well beyond the 51 dBu digital contour that is protected by the Commission's rules. So if you did a coverage contour based on 51 dBu, you would have people who might interfere in that spectrum in areas where the station is being viewed. There aren't a lot of ways to fix that other than to try to use a Longley Rice type of terrain-based service area prediction method. That's complicated, and I don't know if there are any proprietary software issues there. So it's a problem, and I don't know how big a problem it is because I don't know how many people are going to use the system for different purposes. If you want to use the system to research the scope of a company's holdings to see if they're big or they're not too big, I'm concerned a little bit about take, for example, the cellular telephone area, where if you're a Verizon customer, you can be on the Verizon network almost all over the country. But in rural areas, you are almost certainly roaming, not on a subsidiary of Verizon, but on a company that has an agreement with Verizon, not only to allow roaming, but to have the Verizon brand so that you don't get the roaming signal on your cell phone. And I don't know how you can find that out. I don't even know if all that information is reported to the Commission so that a user would have a realistic picture of how much Verizon owns. I know you can find out what they lease if they report leases, but it's not a lease to have a roaming agreement, so I'm not sure how you deal with that. And finally, since time is running out, I'm wondering how the dashboard is going to deal with public safety radio, where police and fire departments are very sensitive and absolutely do not want information displayed about what frequencies they operate on so that they can't be hacked or interfered with maliciously. I'm not even sure that they like the idea of the geographic scope of their signal coverage displayed. That may not be as big an issue as the display of their frequencies. So that's an issue also I think has to be dealt with. And with 3 seconds to go, I'm right on time. Thanks.
Thanks, Peter. The next panelist is Abhinav Bushnet from the Brattle Group.
Thank you for holding the discussion and giving the opportunity to talk. I wanted to approach my discussion from two fronts. One, as a user who would use the dashboard, and on another front, as somebody who uses the information to do a lot of the analytical work that we do at the Brattle Group. The underlying, whichever way you look at it, I think the underlying question we're trying to get at is sort of build transparency on how spectrum is used, by whom, and where, really. And some of the points I have is already, I think people have already mentioned it, but I will also reiterate it. I've used mainly the underlying database in the ULS, and I only looked at the dashboard recently. I've been using it, and the distinction I want to draw was somebody who uses the dashboard just to get general information, and versus somebody who uses it repeatedly. And so the two ways to approach, and two examples that come to mind is, for example, when I look at the BBC website, there's a way you could sort of customize the types of information that would be available to you when you open the website. The other is sort of the trade website, where when we use a lot of the data, you could create a username, and for a lot of the queries that you run, that's saved. So if you were to use this in any way that you come back to it repeatedly, in some way the dashboard is sort of more customizable and more personalized to that user, whether you're interested in a certain type of frequency, certain type of issues. You should be able to sort of go back to it rather than have to go back and sort of reinvent the wheel again and again. And for people who don't use it that often, I think the main website is also has the necessary information. And going back now, I want to sort of talk more about the data and the types of data that was available. And I saw that you could do queries. Another way to do the queries, and I thought would be really useful, is sort of be able to customize that query, as opposed to having everything spit out and you have a large data set where you really don't know how to use it or understand a lot of the issues implicit in that download. So, but if you could sort of choose, here are the types of companies I want, here are the types of bands I want, then sort of output it in that way. I think that would be a lot more user-friendly. I do like the feature of tags, but like somebody has mentioned earlier about it's not clear how those tags are defined. But in addition, I think it would be useful to have users build those tags, especially going down the route of a person who uses more often. And by the same token, if you have the ability to search on the tags that other people use, I think it might be a good way to sort of get people more familiar. Maybe somebody's interested in AT&T and sort of build different queries, so you could piggyback on sort of getting the information. And I understand the goal is to make it very user-friendly and a lot of the terminology easy to comprehend. And in that respect, I think having some sort of forum or sort of glossary where a lot of the terms are used somebody could search and sort of get what the technical interpretation of is, or maybe more layman interpretation. And similarly, if there are questions, like for example, when I use the ULS database, I've often sent questions and people respond. I think to have that same discussion in some sort of forum, and somebody could sort of go back and rather than go through the process with a couple of days, and maybe that's another way to sort of get a feel for how people are using it, what types of concerns are emerging as they use the information there. The other really useful feature would be, as you're doing searches on bans and sort of ownership, it would be good to have the proceedings or the debates ongoing with that, and sort of being able to link into that sort of information as it becomes available. So going back to the idea of, if you're a repeated user, you're interested in a particular band, then you know as things are being updated in a particular proceeding, then that would, on your homepage, say, be updated automatically. I think that would be very useful, especially when it comes to tying in information where ownership changes or the rule changes. That information will be up there and very transparent. From a lot of the work that we do at Brattle is sort of spectrum valuation, and a lot of that work requires sort of being able to look at the band in sort of aggregation. And both the ULS and this feature is still, I think, very much being able to search individual licenses at the present. Although it does capture the band, I would like to see more flexibility in sort of being able to aggregate the whole band and sort of being able to inspect it in a bit more detail. And with that said, I think from a policy standpoint, at some point being able to access historical data in terms of ownership changes, partitions, disaggregation would be very useful in terms of trying to understand how this whole process is sort of evolving, and sort of being able to anticipate questions that are likely to emerge with broadband use, especially on the wireless front, and sort of inspecting historical changes would be a good way to, from a policy standpoint. With that, I think, thank you.
All right. Thank you. Our next panelist is Michael Calabrash from the New America Foundation.
Okay. Well, thanks for inviting our feedback. New America Foundation has worked for years on these spectrum issues, largely as part of a very broad-based coalition of consumer, media reform, civil rights, and education groups. And although I don't speak for any of them individually, I think it would be fair to convey on our behalf and many of theirs heartfelt thanks and praise to the Commission for this ambitious, impressive, and generally consumer-friendly guide to how the public spectrum resource is allocated. You're off to a fantastic start with this. I believe the Commission deserves particular kudos for getting out ahead of the bipartisan calls from Congress for a comprehensive and fully transparent inventory of the public airwaves. And so we view this really as the template, as the foundation for making the results of that more detailed spectrum inventory transparent to the public in the very short time when that bill passes the Senate and you can begin that process with NTIA. It's also, I should add, long overdue. It's been 6 years since New America attempted to demystify spectrum allocation with our Citizens Guide to the Airwaves, which was a graphical representation of the airwaves. There was the huge demand for that poster brochure, from Capitol Hill to classrooms to high-tech boardrooms, really demonstrated just how opaque this process is, and even to policymakers in the informed public who really couldn't get their arms around it at all. But as a poster brochure, we realized that our effort was entirely static and broad brush in nature, very rapidly out of date. There have been many discussions, including among some at this table, about doing an online, detailed, and searchable and more interactive citizens guide, such as the FCC has now done. But the funding was just not available from foundations or other sources that we tried. Even so, we would have been hard-pressed to produce a graphical inventory as ambitious and interconnected, potentially, to all of the licensing records and other data as the FCC's dashboard effort. So again, we're really happy about that. I'd like to first, single out a few extremely helpful features that we consider cornerstones. First is the is the ability to do searches in different ways, as you mentioned, by frequency band from a scrollable map of the spectrum itself, by county from the map interface, by radio service, and by common names of companies that are licensees. That common name feature is very, very useful to the general public. It's particularly useful to the average citizen, I think, the scrollable display of the spectrum, which is now up to 3.7 gigahertz. And also important is the ability to click through to more detailed information. The descriptions of the various services on each band, the links to the FCC rule parts are very important, and the link to a list of license holders, license record summaries, and also to the license records themselves, although I should mention they could be more clearly marked and presented. And then also we like the fact that the shape files, for example, so for services such as BRS, showing the coverage area graphically, including a topography option. The prepared reports are very helpful, and hopefully you'll expand on that. And the spectrum availability by county has a lot of potential, although it needs to be, I think, fixed up quite a bit. So our recommendations for version 2.0, in addition to the enhancements suggested in the public notice, of which I would mention spectrum leases is probably the most important thing. Also third-party data such as population and demographic data, the sorts of things that FCC and NTIA will presumably add on to the national broadband map should also be accessible here. In addition to that, I think first is the frequency range should be expanded as you go forward. The bill that's already passed the House is up to 10 gigahertz unless the FCC has a compelling reason not to do so. And so I think you should just go ahead and do that. Second is to integrate all available information on the federal government frequency bands and assignments. So right now, when a citizen looks at what their own government is controlling on the airwaves, there's just a cryptic one-liner saying that the band is allocated for federal use. So at a minimum, there should be a click-through to the NTIA Red Book manual sections that are relevant to each band. And as the Spectrum Inventory Acts are faithfully implemented, hopefully there'll be considerably more detailed information, except where appropriate national security safeguards kick in. From any of the search modes, the user should be able to both sort the results in various ways. So, for example, although you can, all those click-throughs I mentioned seem easily available from the scrollable display of the spectrum from that view. If I choose a county, if I go through the map and choose Cook County, Illinois, it gives me the list of licensees in alphabetical order, but otherwise everything's kind of random, and you should be able to sort it by service or by frequency, and in the other ways that you can sort it on the other view. And then from any of the search modes, the user should be able to click through to all of the more detailed descriptions and inventories. Like I said, this works best from the frequency search view, but not so much from the others. The click-through for each frequency band is very useful, but we'd recommend adding a few things. One is, which was just mentioned, links to recent or pending orders and proceedings governing the allocation and use of that particular band. For federal bands, as I said, at least at a minimum, immediately the Red Book sections. The ability to open, you should also have the ability to open a more detailed view of the band allocations. So if I go to what I happen to know are channels 38 to 51 on the UHF band, which is represented only as 614 to 698, which is cryptic to the average citizen, you can't see that that's actually divided into channels. And so everything that's channelized should expand open into the particular channels. There should also be more clear links to the underlying database of license records. Now there's just something on the side that says enhanced information. Two more things I'd mention quickly because I'm way over time. First is to add, but maybe I'm giving some food for thought for the discussion. I think you should add a wiki for each frequency band because the FCC is not the only source of information in the world on these frequency bands. This would permit the posting of additional information such as, for example, the licenses, the capacity that might be available on secondary market for purchase or lease, allow people to put that up there. Actual spectrum occupancy measurements, since the government hopefully soon will be doing that but isn't yet. There's a lot of academics and others doing that, and they should be able to post that information. And then also add an important category that's missing is build-out, right? So the license assignments are only half the story. What's equally important for all sorts of policy reasons is what's actually being used out there. And so we really need, I realize that this information isn't always readily available, but that should be part of the effort of the overall commission is to get that information. In the meantime, you could incorporate the shape files that come in from the state broadband mapping efforts because there could be some very useful information there. So I'll stop. The only other thing is, it sounds like somebody else will pick up on this, spectrum availability by county doesn't seem to really be working. In a way, it'll show that a county has, that a lot of counties have some spectrum available, but if you click, there's only a list of 50 counties with sort of a total number, and you really can't tell what that means, like what actually is specifically available and from who for what. Thanks.
Thank you. Our next panelist is Byron Barker from NTIA.
Thank you, James. First, I want to thank the FCC, particularly IRA, for inviting NTIA to today's forum. I know you wanted to get the bigger fish, my boss, here today, but unfortunately you got me, which that'll be good anyway, I think. I'm laying out the plans for us for the future. I think for the interest of time, I took a little time. Some of you, few of you here that know me know I kind of tend to talk a little bit much, so I'm going to go based on some notes I jotted down today while I was riding the commuter bus into work. And I think with my little Oklahoma twang, I tend to carry things a little further. So we're glad to be here to share our thoughts as much as we can about making information more transparent. But mainly, I'm here more as an observer to gather thoughts and ideas regarding benefits the users see with having such capabilities as the Spectrum Dashboard. As we prepare to address the call from Congress on pending legislation called the Radio Spectrum Inventory Act, the administration has voiced its support for performing such an inventory. We do see and understand the importance of making information known, especially since that is one of the key priorities of this administration. The information we possess can assist researchers, developers, entrepreneurs, innovators in conceiving new innovative wireless technologies that enable the achievement of affordable broadband availability across America. We know that the radio spectrum, the resource we manage, both at NTIA and at FCC, is vital to this expansion. So how do we see doing this? Well, we do see the need for making as much of our information available to the public as possible and in a way that is more interactive, so to allow it to be more accessible and searchable and at the same time understandable to the viewer. We most likely will not publish our database, or as we call it, the government master file, just as the FCC has done with their database. We face challenges in accomplishing this. I think Michael mentioned and a gentleman mentioned earlier about the public safety aspect, primarily due to the sensitivity or possible implications to national security and some of our other national interests. But this doesn't mean we can do it to some degree. Even with this challenge, we feel we can present it in terms of bands with descriptions of how they are used. As an example, we currently have such a description. We call it our Federal Spectrum Use Summary. It's posted on our website right now. It is a very general description currently available, like I said, on our website. We're looking right now at developing something similar but in a more expanded narrative detail. So we will develop plans as we move along in expanding and improving our capabilities. We see a possibility for providing something similar to what has been done here at the FCC with the dashboard. That's one of my primary reasons why I'm here today, to hear from folks what they like or dislike with having such capabilities. We will definitely collaborate with the FCC in making better improvements with the information we possess. I think it is important that we show both the federal and non-federal side of the spectrum. We obviously want to serve the people as well as our federal partners that we provide the oversight for the spectrum management. So I'm looking forward to our panel discussions today, and I think I met my time.
Thank you. We're going to actually take a 10-minute break, and then we'll come back at 11:05 and start the panelist again. Thanks. Our next panelist is Joe Hanley from U.S. Cellular.
Thank you. Thank you for convening this forum and creating this intuitive and accessible tool. And thank you also for inviting U.S. Cellular to participate today. We are, just to provide a frame of reference, U.S. Cellular is the sixth largest mobile network operator in the U.S., but to put that in context, we are about 1/15 the size of our largest competitor. So I think it's probably a truism to say this, but spectrum really is the lifeblood of any mobile operator's business. It is something that is always on the mind of every operator, large or small. Every operator that operates a wireless network is concerned about having enough spectrum to provision the capacity in its network required to meet the demand of its customers. Spectrum has to be allocated for commercial use, first of all. It has to be licensed in a way that's accessible to operators. And then it has to be deployed through auctions and through the secondary market. And navigating those markets and making good decisions requires having access to timely, cost-effective, and accurate information. And this tool is an important part of that equation, particularly for smaller players. I think it's safe to say that that large companies, and even a company the size of U.S. Cellular, but particularly large companies that have billions of dollars in assets in spectrum, are going to commit the resources required to create for themselves or buy on the market tools that allow them to understand what spectrum is held by other players. And what spectrum they hold and what the spectrum marketplace looks like generally. But for smaller companies and for consumers and for the broad range of stakeholders for whom spectrum is impactful, a tool like the FCC has created with the Spectrum Dashboard is indispensable, and we want to applaud you for doing that. We found the visual and graphical tools to be very, very intuitive and very accessible. Spectrum chart and mapping tools are very, very useful in that regard. The common name aspect has been cited by other folks and is certainly useful for consumers, but I think even smaller companies attempting to figure out who holds what spectrum in what markets, who to contact in an environment where licenses are actually held by subsidiary operating companies that can be a labyrinthine type of structure. That common name tool is very powerful for us as well. We found the search capabilities and filters easy to use. A number of improvements have been mentioned by folks and are already teed up for development. And we would support all of those. Additional selection tools, including not only enhancements on the county level selection, but also the ability to select by more traditional license areas for operators is useful. The spectrum chart as a selector as well. Inclusion of leasing arrangements would significantly enhance the utility of the tool as a vehicle for navigating the secondary market. Links to other relevant information on the FCC website for particular bands, including band plans, proceedings, auctions, etc., would be helpful. More detail on the federal usage and frequencies also would be valuable to us. So again, thank you very much for inviting us, and look forward to the remainder of the panel.
Thank you. The next panelist is Peter Shinhula from Shared Spectrum Company.
Hi, thank you very much. Appreciate being back here at the Commission. It's been a while. Great to see old friends and new faces, but it seems like we're working on the same stuff we were working on, about 8 years ago, when the Spectrum Policy Task Force issued, a lot of its recommendations, and it's nice to see some of those being implemented right now. But I want to kind of bring a different perspective to the discussion, more from where I sit now with Shared Spectrum Company. I'm a general counsel there, and kind of doing a lot of different things. We kind of say, from my perspective, kind of want to represent kind of the future users of the dashboard of the inventory that maybe they don't exist yet. They're not here, or they're like Shared Spectrum, where they're just starting kind of to introduce their technologies. Because it's not necessarily the humans that are going to be using the data; it's the machines and the devices. So that's what I want to kind of make you aware of, is that you can come up with thousands of use cases and a wide variety of user groups. But really, I wanted to kind of maybe focus the discussion later on kind of what's necessary, not necessarily on the front end to make it nice and pretty and user friendly, but also on the back end, so the data itself can be machine readable and processable by a variety of third parties, a variety of applications as well. I go into more detail about that later. But just about our company, we've developed this technology called dynamic spectrum access cognitive radio technology, and it enables the shared access to the valuable but unused spectrum resources. So I appreciate Mary's emphasis on being kind of having plain language, but I would also suggest having accurate language. The spectrum availability map by county, the availability, that's very wrong. If you'll take a look at the spectrum occupancy measurements that Shared Spectrum has done, you'll see much more availability than that. Basically, what that means is it's still in the FCC hopper, and it hasn't been licensed yet or auctioned yet. And I would say that's even incomplete. So I would make sure that when you're talking about, the idea of a glossary was a really good idea. Be very, very accurate with your terminology of what it means to be quote unquote available or not available. Maybe available on the secondary market or available for a certain type of use or limitation. So, with our cognitive radio technology, being able to get access to the so-called unused spectrum, it may be licensed, it may be allocated, but our devices are able to sense, either through sensing the environment, actually whether we sense any emissions, but also, like the TV white space concept, to tap into databases. And so the TV white space database, and I'm glad the broadband plan suggests going further beyond just the TV white space database for all bands, applying that across the board so that devices can tap into that database like a dashboard and find out information of where the spectrum is being used and where it's not being used. So it's a game-changing technology. I think you just got to be aware of as you're developing the back end, and allow us to really drill down to find the holes, because that's what the information provides, is the ability to find the holes in the spectrum. And then I also mentioned it's important for implementation of the spectrum inventory legislation, which is very important, which would kind of merge the NTA and FCC databases together, kind of like was implemented in 70, 80, 90 gigahertz, which was a successful trial of that. So you got to disclose the data. Michael mentioned this from NTIA, and even so. Basically, it's about identifying the spectrum that's available for sharing, for possible reallocation based on its use. There's a lot of definitely uses for the data itself, and again, I applaud the efforts to make the front end look pretty, but I'm a chair of the Regulatory Committee for Wireless Innovation Forum, which is formerly SDR Forum, and when I let folks take a look at announced, when the dashboard was announced, these are kind of hardcore users, and kind of some of the reactions I got were, it looks like they're putting lipstick on a pig, and so it's really that back end data that's important, and I think to have standardized formats for that, make that available to folks like Brattle Group to manipulate in any way, and to have a kind of search script. Most important thing I would try to emphasize. Thanks.
Thanks, Peter. Next up is David Reddall from CTIA.
Thanks, and thanks for having me here this morning. I'm going to pick up on some of what Peter was saying about accuracy, and I think from our perspective, accuracy of the data is going to be of key importance to CTIA and its members. We have to bear in mind that since this is on the FCC's website, it's going to carry the weight of the FCC behind it, and making sure that things are the way that the dashboard says they are, I think, is going to be an important aspect going forward. It's unclear to us, and we've been sort of dancing around it, whether Dashboard is a standalone database or if Dashboard will be integrated with the existing FCC databases. And I know the reports pull from Gen Menu, which is great, and give you access to some of the existing FCC tools. But at least a few of us on this panel were here a week ago to discuss the consolidated licensing system, and I think going forward, part of the glide path for Dashboard should be to integrate with the consolidated licensing system so that the information is current as of the most recent tool that the FCC has at its disposal. That would be sort of the long-term glide path. I also have a couple of short-term issues that have come up that we would think would be great ways to go that haven't been raised in the public issues. As far as suggestions, being able to link, particularly in the auction services, my background is with CTIA. We deal with the CMRS bands. Linking to band plans and being able within an individual service, so within 700, to pull, say, 700 megahertz B block licenses and see that information. I understand it's probably not something that would be tailored specifically for the general public, but it seems like a lot of folks on this panel are in agreement with us that maybe the eDocs approach is the way to go, a very simple, straightforward portal for the consumer, but an advanced tab for those of us that use FCC record citations. So cross-linking to the band plans and cross-linking to some of the other tools on the FCC's website. In terms of looking at the auction services, the auction pages are actually fairly robust in terms of their ability to have the band plans linked and to link to data sets from the auctions themselves, to link to the public notices that were associated with that band. So I would think linking to those would also be a suggestion we would have. Also kind of speaking to what Peter said and something that I had brought up with the consolidated licensing system last week as well, I agree that while having a very robust and simple front end for the average consumer is great, no matter how complex you make the ability to use this website, there will be folks out there that will cry for APIs and hope to have access to the data themselves to manipulate it better. And I think Peter and our friends at the Brattle Group down there would be among those users. I'm sure CTIA would also be among those users. A question going forward as to sort of the leasing information as we work that in, as well as partnerships, is how that'll be reflected in the consumer portal. Currently, if you look in areas where you have spectrum leases in place, it will show the spectrum licensed to one entity, but that entity may or may not be using that spectrum because they have a lease out already filed with the FCC. So how that'll be handled going forward to ensure that the actual amount of spectrum you're showing one licensee having access to in a given either market or county, depending on how you've searched, and reflecting that through leases and partnerships. It's the age-old real property question, right? Tenants in common versus joint tenants. If it's a partnership, is it counting against one? Is it counting against both? Is it counting half against one or the other? That's a question that we have going forward in terms of how it will show spectrum allocations. And then just to finalize some of my things on accuracy, I would respectfully disagree with Michael on the wiki and the coverage information, the build-out information being added to the dashboard. A wiki, by its nature, is a great tool on the internet, but again, we need to bear in mind that this site carries the FCC's name on it. And wikis can be highly accurate and can be highly inaccurate. And I think adding one and adding any level of inaccuracy would be inappropriate for the site. I certainly see a place for wikis on the internet. I don't think it's on the Spectrum dashboard. And as far as build out, again, carriers are providing on their websites coverage maps. I'm not sure that adding build out information that may or may not be as accurate as what's on carrier websites would necessarily be the best for consumers. It's going to provide some confusion. Am I to believe the map on the FCC's website, or am I to believe the map on the carrier's website? So I would urge everyone to tread lightly as we look in that direction. And I'm not as close to hitting the mark, but with 8 seconds left, I think I'm finished.
Thank you. I think Peter beat you by about 5 seconds. Tim Donovan is next with the Rural Cellular Association.
Thank you, James, and thanks for everyone, and thanks to the FCC for putting together this great tool. I think that holds a lot of promise, and we're really looking forward to the 2.0 version. We're appreciative for the chance to be here today, and hope that you can take some of these great ideas that are shared by the panel and incorporate it into the next version. The Rural Cellular Association represents rural and regional wireless carriers throughout the country, and our membership consists of those that serve under 10 million subscribers in their markets, and that goes all down to under 1,000 subscribers in their market. So it encompasses many companies that have low subscriber totals and are small businesses. In that light, it's very useful to our members to have access to some of this data, and we hope that it continues to improve. We believe in the future of broadband, a sentiment that would be shared pretty much by everyone here. And with the future of mobile broadband, we're going to require increased use of the spectrum. And having the dashboard available to show the direction that we should take in that regard is a big help. We also support and encourage the Senate passage of the legislation that passed the House, and we hope that some of that data can be included in the next generation of the dashboard and future generations going forward. In that light, we'd differ a little bit from David and encourage that the actual build-out be included in the future uses of the map. When you take that and you allow the map to be drawn beyond the county level but by the market areas for each license, you can then demonstrate where spectrum is being warehoused and where some of the possibilities exist for future arrangements to make use of that spectrum. When you have a spectrum scarcity, we can ill afford to have valuable spectrum sit idle while consumers are in need and demand these services, and that's especially true in rural America. As the gaps are identified, we can also use that to help drive more value to future auctions, where you can then determine the appropriate size of the license areas based on the historical value of where the licenses have been built out in the past. And it may be best value to encourage licenses where future services will be deployed side by side with those that you can see from where the current licenses are being built out. We also would encourage the overlay with some of the broadband maps that are laid out there. It won't be in time for some of the stimulus funding programs, but a lot of our members that have applied through those programs would have made use of the maps demonstrating where the broadband's been built out and where they can get spectrum to include that in the future ones. Beyond that, many of our ideas have been brought up by the panel, so I'm going to turn it back to you with a couple minutes to spare.
Thanks. Next up is Michael Saperstein from PCIA.
Thank you, and thanks for having me here today to discuss this. PCIAs, we represent the Wireless Infrastructure Association, but we have kind of a unique role because we have our representation of wireless infrastructure, which includes the major carriers and also the tower companies, but we're also an FCC-authorized frequency coordinator and AWS clearinghouse operator. So we have two different perspectives, which I think bridges the gap between how is the public going to use this versus how is the business going to use that. So I will discuss each of those in turn. Starting with our wireless infrastructure provider perspective, we're concerned, and this has to do with build-out as well, that the general public may conflate the coverage maps that they see all over the commercials with the license maps that they see here on the Spectrum dashboard. You know, we frequently get inquiries at PCIA for the coverage maps showing where do people have towers, where are their antennas, and you know, the maps look very similar. They're very dark where they have a lot of spectrum here, and they're very dark where the carriers show that they have a lot of coverage. But there are many instances where more infrastructure is actually needed in those areas to provide adequate coverage and capacity for users in that areas. So in other words, to turn the dark color on the spectrum dashboard into a dark color on a coverage map. The Understanding Your Results page of the dashboard has a paragraph that includes the sentence, the FCC makes no representations or warranties about the provision of service on the spectrum included in this database. And I think that's aimed at this point, but we would ask that that point be made more clear and really on the map section, that point really be emphasized, that your total spectrum holdings do not equal the coverage that you may have in a particular area. So that's our overall concern from the public side. From the frequency coordinator and AWS clearinghouse operator perspective, I think David hit on this earlier, and it's a great point, that this system, including the map, should really be tied as much as possible into the consolidated licensing system. And as you go forward with that, we really think that that's going to be a great tool, and we would like to see a seamless flow, especially with the maps going forward. We deal primarily with the private land mobile radio service users, many of whom are businesses who use radio services for their individual businesses, but beyond that don't know a whole lot about spectrum. And so their interest is in seeing, is there PLMRS spectrum available in my area? And currently, from at least the way I was able to use it, the map function doesn't lend itself to this. If you click on the industrial business part specifically and then search by the industrial businesses, you're just given a range of frequencies. And if you click on Show License Records, you're taken away from the dashboard to another database. And you really have no mapping functionality based upon that. Now, I believe you could go back out from that search and type in coordinates or some other way, but you've really backdoored your way into a different license regime there. So we think one of the most useful tools for PCIA customers would be to see what private licenses are operating in their areas, and they can't really do this at this time. Just a couple of other points. We would also like to see the range of spectrum bands enlarged. As we have clients, they may be rare, but they are outside of the current bandwidth shown on the spectrum dashboard. And I would also second the glossary point and the available spectrum as well. I mentioned for the PLMRS users, if you click, it says that there is so much spectrum available in these sections, but there's not a list of what's available and for whom. So we would like to see that functionality increased as well. So with that, I will give back the rest of my time. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Are there any questions from the audience at this point? Okay, I'll start with the questions then. The first question is actually for Joe and David. You had both mentioned that you wanted to see leasing data in the dashboard, and we're actually interested in your perspective of how we should be depicting the leasing data. I think specifically, David, you had some concerns about how we would be doing it, and I kind of throw it back to you. I mean, what would you like to see?
Well, from our perspective, the concern there was if spectrum is being leased out, that it not reflect that it is being used by the licensee. How to actually depict that on the map, I'm not sure. As far as being able to depict that within the search queries, I would think you could probably have that as a sub-box of each of those, of the detail section of the licenses themselves. When you drop down, you get additional information on a licensee and their particular license in the search queries. I would think that would be an appropriate place to link to the leases themselves. But as far as putting them on the map, I'll defer to Joe and see if he has a better answer on the map than I do.
Yeah. So just in terms of intent, I think driving secondary market transactions, trying to identify where we have a need for spectrum, where we have the best opportunity to make a deal, if you will. It's useful to understand where a license is an additional relationship attached to it with either a de facto lease transfer arrangement, some type of obligation attendant to it that we would need to understand. So I think that we would want to be able to identify in a particular geography that has a license associated with it, whether it has a lease attached to the same identical geography.
Mary, do you want to add anything to this?
I mean, I think what you've said kind of follows what we're looking at for leases. I think there might have been some mention of, whether the spectrum is actually considered to be available. Is that dependent upon the type of lease? Is that something that's important to know as well? And the term of the lease? I mean, or is it just sufficient to show that it's being leased at this point and the type of lease? Or
I think the type of lease and term are important.
And it's important as far as the flexibility to show that on a map when you're considering, the amount of spectrum that a licensee might hold.
Yeah.
Okay.
And again, I think it would be best if it cycled back to existing databases. Tying it back to the existing databases that hold the lease information would be the best start in order to get this out into the dashboard.
Okay. I think also you should be sure not. I don't think this would be your intent, but be sure not to obscure the licensee. So it should be very clear. The primary information is the licensee, but then have an additional field and associated record for the the leasing information, including everything that they said. I think that would be very useful.
So just to summarize, for example, the concept would be show where where spectrum is licensed, but also be able to show if the spectrum is being leased. And then you can also kind of turn things on and off, so you can just see licensed spectrum versus leased spectrum, or both. So just provide as much flexibility as possible, and then let the user determine how they want to see the data.
I think, to circle back again on looking at ULS, I think ULS does a pretty good job of kind of identifying when there are applications pending or renewals pending. I think a similar flag, certainly in the search field, to be able to show that there is more information on leasing in the drop-down if you drop this down would be a good way to do it, and I think that would address Michael's concerns as well, that you're going to see the primary licensee up front first and have to drop down to get the leasing arrangements.
Okay. I think Roger has a question.
Yes. Is this one on?
Yes.
Just to make sure I'm clear here, there's a couple ways we could come at this. We could be really good at having people identify where spectrum is being leased. We could be really good at, once you look at a licensed area, telling you and identifying for you that there's leases there, here are the terms of those leases. The second is what it sounds like you're talking about. It doesn't sound like anybody's talking about that we should be really, really good at helping you find leases out there. Or am I wrong that there is a need to come at this from the angle of where are the leases?
Right. I think you're at least from U.S. Cellular's perspective, your analysis is correct. We would be looking at a particular geography and a spectrum need underlying that and looking for ways to deliver on that. And so the focus would be starting with the geography and then leading to the lease, as opposed to starting with a lease concept and going back the other way.
Can I just add, back when we're working with James on this and trying to figure out enhancements, this is mainly kind of ULS or CLS enhancement, is also allowing the licensees to indicate in their say what we offer. Here's what our availability is. Like what's the form number now for leases?
608.
608, pre-filed 608. So basically, licensee goes in there, fills out their part of the 608, say we're willing to lease it, under these terms and conditions, and then a potential lessor can come in and say, we'll take those conditions, or at least they'll have a contact information, kind of like a multiple listing service. Obviously, that cuts into some of the business that there's spectrum brokers out there doing the exact same thing, but this might provide at least a more friendly, available, more comprehensive front end, a listing service basically of what might be available.
Thank you. I think Michael, you had a comment.
Yeah, it was. Actually, Peter did a better job than I was going to in suggesting that same thing, and that's what I had in mind in suggesting, in mentioning that as one potential functionality of a wiki, that you could promote secondary markets and other purposes, so that licensees could come forward and say this is available, and so that's another way, of doing that, at least with respect to leases. It would be ideal to be able to go in and be able to sort. Not only existing leases, but potential lease spectrum.
Okay, I think Abnam and then Peter.
What
When I've looked at the lease information on the ULS, one of the concerns and the difficulties I had was to make sure I was not double counting anything, and to make that a bit more transparent, because a lot of times when they're pending, it kind of falls out. You kind of drop those observations, say, and you have ones that are leased out. But to get somebody get a holistic perspective on a ban, say who's using what, I think it's important to get that also right.
Peter?
I'm hearing more and more talk about wikis and linking to other places where information may be available. I guess maybe this is just my lawyer's instinct, but I have a feeling that the government has some issues in an official database or function unless it's very clear that you get a warning page that you're leaving the government website, going to something private, and that the government doesn't take any responsibility for it.
Thank you. Brian?
With respect to the lease issue, I think it would be helpful to, as James was mentioning, to have the ability to sort of click your way down on a map to sort the information in different ways. Sort of the top level would be obviously license rights and or lease rights. And then if you could go to something akin to usage rights, which would have all your license rights but backing out stuff that's leased. And then your lessees would also be listed there as having usage rights for whatever their lease covers. So that way, if you're just looking for spectrum usage rights, you could see who actually had the right at this time that you might want to approach to do a sublease or a leasing arrangement with them. One of the problems with leases, obviously the lease documents are not on file with the Commission. They're frequently available for publicly traded companies through other sources, but you don't always know all the terms and conditions of the lease, and the licensee might have the ability to terminate the lease at 30 days' notice, or the lessee might have that right for all you know. So it's important to show who owns the underlying sort of residual de jure controlled right to the license and who has some temporary usage rights.
Okay. Anything else on leasing? No? Okay. Abnam, I have a question for you. You had mentioned aggregating kind of spectrum or aggregating your results, and I just want you to kind of explain a little bit more what it is you actually do and how we could probably or might enhance the dashboard to kind of accommodate what you're trying to do.
All right. So when I've used the licensing system, say for a particular band, go to 700 megahertz, one way to approach is you look at the end of the auction results and say, here are all the people who won the licenses and across these areas. But once the auction is finished, you kind of look at it from the licensing standpoint and say, okay, give me who owns these licenses, because the ownership might have changed. So in terms of being able to aggregate the information across the country of who owns what, where, I think that's kind of the idea. And then sort of over time, if that sort of changes, kind of being able to trace that, and especially in terms of being able to establish what a license value is, a lot of that comes into play. And it gets trickier with sort of PCS and when the cellular, when you have sort of partitions and disaggregations where you don't know where all the pieces of the puzzle are. And so, and you end up with, when you sort of try to aggregate all of that and sort of pull it together and try to put it on a map, you begin to see holes and you quite don't know what pieces you're missing and sort of who owns what counties.
Okay. Any follow-up to that? Brian?
I've done a lot of spectrum aggregation analyses over the years for merger transactions, and the step you're talking about and the common name that you've added to this feature takes a lot of the legwork out of doing those types of analyses. You run into some very strange issues, though, when you have licenses that are owned by partners, each of which might own a significant amount of the license. You could have a general partnership, which under the rules everyone would be counted as that spectrum belonging to them. Adding the common name feature gives you an incredible ability to sort of filter down on who actually owns, for a particular company, what spectrum they may have. It would be nice if this could be tied into the ownership reporting system in a way that you could have that information updated on a regular basis. But just adding the common name feature, gets you 70% of the way down the road from what we currently have.
Yeah. As a follow-up, one of the difficulties I had was when I sort of pulled sort of band information, I wanted to sort of tie in the ownership and trying to pull in what the ownership and sort of essentially sort of build that common name. You'd have to sort of trace out who owns where, what percentage, and sort of build all these sort of criteria. And even when you did that, it was still hard to be sure that you've captured everything and you haven't missed out.
So are you suggesting that you be able to see, right now when you go to a band, you get the services and then you look at licenses by the service, kind of having that aggregated more so you can see all the licensees that hold spectrum within that band and being able to map that across the entire band.
Yeah,
and kind of
exactly. So another way to sort of approach it would be, so if you're in a certain band, to have a system, like some sort of query where I could say, okay, I want this common name or all these people who own licenses or possibilities, and I want these bands or in these markets, and you kind of just kind of drop it into a box, and with that, it kind of builds your query of what you're looking for, rather than getting individual files in sort of, I think it's like pipe delimited or something. Then you kind of find ways to link by the call sign, and then make sure all that sort of ties in.
Joe, did you have a follow-up? No. Peter Tenhula, this is for you. You had talked about the dashboard being machine readable. Can you expand on that concept?
Well, it's the data itself. Here's what the tech guys tell me. It's a standards-based XML framework or schema. There's lots to talk about open APIs. The specific interface, for querying was the SOAP interface, which was mentioned to me, SOAP, which is common standardized approach for database guys to kind of do their own queries, pull down the exact data they need, for a particular purpose, from the raw data, as opposed to the current approach is, doing your query, downloading that kind of basically manually by clicking, or by pulling down the zip files and the raw data or the daily transaction files, which is all ULS. Oh, and by the way, a lot of the really key important information is not in ULS. So, like a lot of the information stops at, the license service area. Cellular, you have location of transmitters, base stations, and other services you have location as transmitters, base stations. But you don't have that in pretty much every service since 1994. Because what was the reason for asking it? You might have it in the build-out, justifications after, the milestones, but that information and that data. So really it's the format, being XML-based. I would reference a lot of good work that's already been done on the government side, because their spectrum management nightmares are, very, very tough, with all the spectrum they have to manage. There's a thing called Publication 8, Pub 8, that was issued by the Military Communications Electronics Board, MCEB. It incorporates or is cross-referencing a data dictionary that NTIA has come up with. There's these new systems that are being developed, well-funded, called
NATO standard.
Is the NATO SMADEF. I don't know what that acronym means. So there's lots of work on this data on the Pub 8. I actually got the page here. It's called Standard Spectrum Resource Format, SSRF. Worth looking at closely. And the systems that are basically using that, SMIDI is the current one being implemented by DoD, the Joint Spectrum Center. Reach out to those guys. We're doing some work with them to basically add monitoring, spectrum monitoring to that capability, to their spectrum management system. So and so we're putting our spectrum occupancy data in that format, and so I think the more people that know what that data format is, then you can have third-party contributor. It may not be on this particular site, but available through other sites that are clearly disclaimed. But people can add more details about their coverage or where spectrum's available, and also tie in information from the equipment authorization database. There was little talk about it the other day or last week, and there's the emission designator. This little string of characters has very valuable information to it. For when you're sensing, when you're trying to figure out what kind of spectrum to sense for. So that kind of stuff that is not necessarily in ULS, but is associated with the equipment that is authorized for that particular band, could be tied into the database, so long as all the XML-based type language was, understood.
Ira?
Hey, Peter, just to follow up on that, I just want to get your views then on if you feel that this tool is suited for the types of applications you described to enable more cognitive radio systems, or if that's something that is more suited to, say, a third party who can provide those value-added type services. For example, looking at the white spaces, we've got the wireless microphones in that band that operate, short-term, often in very small areas. They turn on, they turn off. Where we looked at having a third party be able to provide services such as, so a white space device would know that a microphone's operating now, but an hour from now might not be there, so the spectrum's available. I'm not sure the spectrum dashboard is really suited for doing those types of things. So to add everything you've just described into the dashboard, I'm not sure. That's really not what the intended purpose was. And I just kind of want to get your view if you think it should morph towards that, or we should really be looking at enabling more third-party type value-added and business opportunities for other companies to provide that rather than the commission doing it.
Yes, third parties. The raw data, though, I think, as most everybody says, is the building block, that you guys collect and that, could be of a common format and then available. I mean, it's the TV whitespace database proponents are also saying the same thing. We can make sure that the data that we pull down from the FCC is accurate in the first place, but then we have the ability to aggregate that data or add more data, like the wireless microphone registrations or whatever the case may be, to that particular database. So I'd say yes, without a doubt, you have to enable the third parties. Well, mainly because I think the resource constraints, the Commission's resource constraints and the incentives aren't quite necessarily aligned with, a potential, for-profit or even not-for-profit third party that could aggregate data, charge for it, have subscription, capabilities, add value to it. But you can't get there, though, unless you have a standardized, and I think a lot of the folks on the database side have mentioned this as well, and they're trying to standardize a lot of the interfaces and the language as well. So you got to start there and work with, I think, those hardcore users, those folks that want to be database providers. And I've talked to several of them. They, like the broadband plan talks about, people want to go beyond the white spaces, for that capability. But you got to have the groundwork laid and in a common format for you can pull that data and its accuracy and reliability is key as well. But really what this formatting issue means is that you've got something that is flexible, adaptable, and you've got the ability for the third parties to repurpose it.
Peter Tannenwald, you had mentioned adding public safety information or the potential of adding public safety information into the dashboard presents some type of issues for the community. And I'm just wondering how that differs from what's in ULS today, which is publicly available information. Should we have more concerns with the dashboard?
I'm not sure how much you can find out in ULS. The place where I picked up this concern, just besides historically, is in the 800 megahertz rebanding, where all of the contracts with Sprint Nextel are confidential, and if you push and say, well, how can these be confidential? They have a lot of public facts in them. They take the appendix that has the frequencies that are being rebanded, and they put a big red mark on that, and you can't let that out anywhere. I don't know. I haven't tried to use ULS to try to find out what frequencies are licensed to what entity. It's probably possible, if you're good enough at it, to pull up a fair amount of that information. I don't know if you could map it or something like that, though. You probably would just know that Washington, D.C. has a certain bunch of frequencies, but exactly, you wouldn't know how they were deployed, maybe between police and fire, and which are the priority channels and emergency channels and things like that. I don't think you could find that out.
Michelle, you had mentioned training. I'm just kind of curious whether you think that should be more of kind of online tutorials, or do you think we should be bringing people into the FCC and providing training?
I think a combination of both. I mean, for people who are able, available to get to the commission, that's great, but I think the online definitely gets you out to a broader community. And I know that we made that recommendation in the context of the updates to the ECFS.
And then I think the last question I have is for Brian. You've used the tool a lot, it seems like. I'm just curious if you could actually just kind of maybe give us a couple examples of how you've used it. And I mean, you had mentioned it saves a lot of time. In what respects?
Well, if you're trying to figure out, if you get a call from a client and they say we need some spectrum in Washoe County, Nevada, my home county, as an example, can you tell us who's licensed there and what might be available? Well, ordinarily what you would have to do is say they're looking for CMRS spectrum. First, you'd have to come up with your list of CMRS services that they might be interested in. Then you'd have to look at and see how all those services are licensed in terms of geography. All the PCS and AWS and 700 megahertz, they use different market area definitions for many of their blocks. And so you have to figure out which AWS market to search to pick up spectrum in Washoe County. And so that would be half the battle right there, just knowing which markets you would need to search to get to Washoe County. What you can do with the dashboard is you can simply zoom in on Washoe County. You can pick the services you're interested in, and you can also, when you export the raw data, let me back up a second. You can zoom in on Washoe County, and it gives you all that. You don't have to do that legwork. So you'll figure out who all the AWS licensees are in Washoe County, who all the PCS licensees are in Washoe County, without having to understand how each of those different blocks might be licensed on a larger geographic area. And then when you go to export the data, which I just discovered yesterday, I was happy to see that it gives you all of the counties that are also associated with the licenses that you've identified. So if you say, okay, there's some A block PCS spectrum in Washoe County that belongs to Sprint, it also lets you know that, well, gee, Sprint's the licensee for the larger MTA, which covers all of Northern California and Northern Nevada, which would help you understand, well, maybe they're willing to do a lease here because it's a small part of their license. Or you can see somebody else who has spectrum available there who only has Washoe County. Maybe they'd be less inclined to give you a lease. So it can help you sort of focus on which carriers you would want to contact, who would be most likely to lease. And it makes the idea of targeting potential providers of spectrum a lot easier.
Peter?
Some of those comments remind me of other things that are very difficult to find out, which might be useful to users of the Spectrum dashboard, but you might not know what they are. For example, if you wanted to know where there were radio reading services for the blind on FM broadcast subcarriers, you couldn't find that out because it's not reported to the Commission. And that takes me to a comment that Bureau Chief Ruth Milkman made at a Federal Communications Bar Association seminar a week or two ago, which was that one of the main goals of the Commission is to promote spectrum flexibility, allowing licensees to put their spectrum to new and innovative and perhaps highest and best uses. The more that is implemented, the less information might be available in Commission databases to show how spectrum is actually being used as opposed to whom it's licensed. So I think that the people who are designing the Spectrum dashboard should be attuned to another goal of the Commission, which is to promote flexibility and start thinking about how you might be able to figure out what flexible uses are being made of spectrum if it doesn't require modification of license to do it.
Anyone else? I think Mary has a couple closing comments. I'm sorry.
Okay.
Iraz, a question.
For Saperstein, you had mentioned one of the enhancements you'd like to see is mapping in the private land mobile bands. And I'm curious as to any ideas you might have on how we would actually implement that. Because as you're aware, as opposed to the commercial bands where we have exclusive licensing, those bands are all shared. So, we have, and the difference in this band is we actually do have tower locations for all the licenses or licensees, but we don't necessarily know how big you draw the circles and how you would depict, the fact that you have layers in that multiple licenses are licensed in the same place, the same frequency to use at the same time on a shared basis. And I'm not sure how you depict that, if you have any thoughts towards how you do that. And then the second question is, if we were able to do this, are there limits on how much we would show? For example, some folks have expressed concern about not providing a tremendous amount of information on the public safety side. Would we look at including that or do it just for industrial business licenses? And I'm just curious if you've given any thought to that and if you have any ideas.
Sure. I don't know that I have a great answer, but one thing I think we'd be interested in would be having the ability to search a map maybe from a center point and then being able to define a certain radius around that. So if you can perhaps, and I realize this is a bit more complicated than your average user might be doing, but if you knew the coordinates around where you were interested in, and then you could maybe search within 25 kilometers of there, I think that would be a useful tool that would integrate the map feature and allow people to see what's going on in their immediate vicinities, but not bring in too many circles. And I realize it's pretty complex because there are shared uses and things like that, but if you could see at least who were the shared users in that radius that you would define, I think that would be very helpful. And as far as public safety, I was primarily concentrating on the industrial and business users. I understand that there are public safety concerns out there, and we don't deal with those as much, so I would certainly defer to the experts on public safety as to how much or little they would be comfortable revealing. But from the private land mobile side, I think it would be very beneficial for numerous customers to see who's out there using the spectrum in their specific areas.
Mary?
Okay. I'd like to thank everyone for being here today, and I would especially like to thank our panelists for being here and providing us with your thoughtful insight into what we should do with the dashboard and what direction we should move with it. We've heard a lot of good ideas, and we definitely have a lot to take back and look at. I think this is just one step in moving towards our version 2.0 and a beginning of a discussion. We hope that you'll continue to provide input and comments through our discussion boards, our survey, and other methods, and keep an eye out on the dashboard to see what's changing, what we're doing, and we'll put up blogs when we're planning on implementing things. So I just encourage you to stay involved, keep providing your input, and thank you for being here.